I never planned on taking anything home that day. Not a dog, not a story, not the kind of silence that follows you even when the world is loud. I was just supposed to drop off a donation, a stack of worn blankets, and a dented bag of food left over from someone who no longer needed it. I told myself it was just a kind gesture. Closure, maybe, but closure doesn't wait for you. It shows up when it's ready, and often in a shape you don't expect. The shelter was small, barely marked, a tin sign bolted crookedly to red brick. Wind howled across the empty lot, rattling a loose chain against a gate. There was no grand entry, no cheerful adopt me posters, just a glass door, scratched from years of paws and keys and weather. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic and worry. The woman at the counter looked up from a clipboard, her eyes tired in that way people get when they've stopped counting how many lives they've tried to save. "Just dropping off?" she asked. I nodded and hoisted the bag onto the table. "Leftovers," I said. Her eyes scanned the label. "Appreciated." There was a pause. She didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. I turned to leave, almost made it, but something pulled at me, not a sound, not a voice, just a feeling, like there was something I hadn't seen yet. My feet turned on their own, toward the back. A narrow hallway stretched beyond the desk, painted a pale, fading green. On one side, a window into a small clinic room. On the other, steel-framed kennels, each lined with grates and tired eyes. Some dogs barked as I passed. Some wagged their tails. A few paced like they were walking the border of a dream they couldn't wake from. And then I saw him, at the end of the row, not centered, tucked into the corner beside a broken mop bucket and a stack of newspapers. He wasn't barking, wasn't begging. He was sitting, upright, still, and watching me. His coat was the color of old wood, faded brown streaked with silver and black. It hung unevenly across his frame, thick around the chest and thin near the hips. One ear was torn at the edge. The other flicked slightly when I stopped walking, but it was the eyes that did it, not sad, not scared. Just quiet. He held my gaze like someone who already knew the worst about people, but was willing to see who I'd turn out to be anyway. I stood there, hands in my jacket pockets, unsure why I hadn't moved on yet. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. "That's the one that doesn't make noise," the woman said softly. I turned. She leaned against the frame of the doorway, arms crossed. "Won't bark, won't whimper, won't move unless you do, doesn't eat much, doesn't sleep much either." I didn't answer. He came in 4 weeks ago. Animal control found him walking the edge of the freight yard. No chip, no collar, nothing. She said it like it wasn't the first time she'd told the story, maybe to herself. "He doesn't ask for anything," she added, "but he waits, every day, same spot, same way." I looked back at him. He blinked once. There was no nameplate on the kennel, no ID card clipped to the gate, just a small piece of metal hanging from a hook beside the latch, round, dull, and warm in color. A brass tag. I bent down, leaned closer. Scratched into the metal were 6 simple words. He was never just a dog. I stood up slowly. My heart did something strange. "I want to take him," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure? You don't even know his name?" I glanced back toward the gate. "He already knows mine." I didn't have a leash. We used an old rope they kept in a drawer. He stepped through the gate without hesitation. No dragging, no confusion, just one foot then the next, like he knew what leaving looked like and didn't plan to make a scene. Outside, the wind picked up again. Leaves swirled near the curb. The sky was gray and flat and wide. He paused at the passenger door of my car, looked up once, then climbed in. He didn't sit. He curled, tucked himself into the space like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The drive home was quiet. I kept checking the mirror. His eyes didn't close. He wasn't anxious. He just watched the road, like he was memorizing the turns in case he needed to find his way back. My apartment wasn't fancy. A second-floor walk-up above a laundromat. The floors creaked in the corners. The heater sounded like it had asthma. The couch was the only nice piece of furniture I owned. He didn't seem to mind. I opened the door. He stepped inside, sniffed the air once, and padded toward the far end of the living room. There was a spot near the window where sunlight hit the floorboards in a long golden stripe. He lay down there, like he belonged to it. I stood there, keys still in hand, watching him make himself part of my space without asking for permission. I wasn't used to that. That night I cooked pasta. I set a bowl of water on the floor near the heater and offered him a little leftover chicken on a plate. He didn't touch it right away, just looked at it, then at me, then back to the food. Only after I sat down at the table did he eat, slowly, neatly. Like he was afraid someone might take it away again. When I went to bed, I half expected to hear footsteps or claws on the floor, but the apartment stayed silent. In the middle of the night, I woke up for no reason. Moonlight filtered through the window. Everything was still. He was lying just outside my bedroom door, facing it, watching, guarding something I didn't know I still had left. Morning came like it always does, quiet, gray, and too soon. He was already awake. Sitting by the window again, I made toast. He didn't beg. He watched me eat like it was a ritual he didn't want to interrupt. I gave him a name that morning. I said it out loud just to see if it fit. Arrow, I said. He looked up, once, then rested his head back on his paws. It wasn't approval, it wasn't rejection, it was acknowledgement. I started talking to him more, though I don't think I expected answers. Old habits die slow, especially when you've lived alone long enough to mistake your own voice for company. Arrow never responded, not in the way I used to expect from a dog. No wagging tail, no excited panting, no goofy tilt of the head. He'd just look at me, hold that gaze like he was choosing what not to say, but there was weight in his silence. A kind of presence you don't realize you miss until it's sitting in your living room, looking at you like it already knows the things you're trying not to think about. He didn't play. Not fetch, not tug of war, not even the casual pawing dogs do when they're bored. There was a tennis ball under the couch from years back, something left behind by a neighbor's pup I dog-sat one summer. I rolled it across the floor out of instinct. Arrow watched it go, watched it stop. And then looked back at me like I'd just asked him to solve a riddle in a language no one speaks anymore. On the third day, I brought him to the park. It wasn't crowded. A few joggers, some squirrels, a couple on a bench passing a thermos between them. I chose a quiet corner under an elm and sat down. Arrow lay at my feet without being asked, legs tucked under, body still except for the occasional flick of his ears. A boy wandered past, holding his mother's hand. He couldn't have been older than 5. The boy pointed. "Can I pet him?" he asked. I started to say no. I didn't know how Arrow would react, but the boy had already let go of his mom's fingers. Arrow didn't move. The boy touched his head softly, fingers hesitant, like the fur might crumble. "He's not like other dogs," the boy said after a moment. I looked at him. "No, he's not." "He listens." Then the boy ran back to his mother, who gave me a nervous smile. Arrow turned his head toward me, as if waiting for my interpretation of what just happened. I didn't have one. We walked home in silence, not uncomfortable, not empty, just quiet, like we'd said all we needed to. That night I sat on the floor beside his makeshift bed. He blinked at me once and then looked away. "I don't know who you belonged to before," I said softly, "but they lost something big when they let you go." His eyes closed. His chest rose and fell slowly. That was the closest thing I'd gotten to an answer. A few days later, the grocery store clerk handed me a flyer. "Community Day," she said, "at the rec center, food trucks, crafts, therapy dogs. You should bring yours." I started to shake my head. "He's not that kind of dog," I said. She smiled. "The best ones never are." I folded the flyer and put it in my coat pocket. I didn't throw it away. Arrow wasn't affectionate, not in the traditional sense. He didn't lick faces or jump onto laps or roll over when he was happy. But he had a way of placing himself beside you at the exact moment your thoughts were turning sharp. It happened one night after a call from my sister. She asked how I was doing. I lied, said I was fine. We exchanged a few awkward words and hung up. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator door for a long time. Arrow walked in, slow and soundless, and sat next to me, not looking at me, just facing the same direction. That was enough. The next morning, I found a small envelope on my doormat. No name. Just a stamp and the address written in tight handwriting. Inside was a card, no return address, no signature, just a sentence written in all caps. Whatever HES lost, you haven't. I looked down at Arrow, who was lying under the window. He met my eyes. I don't know if he'd sent the message. But I wouldn't have been surprised. We fell into a rhythm, morning walks before traffic, midday naps on the rug, evening sits by the heater where he'd curl his tail over his paws and watch the glow like it held secrets. I talked more, he listened better. Sometimes I thought he was the one building the routine, and I was just lucky enough to follow along. The first time he surprised me, it was small. We were walking past a schoolyard fence when a child tripped and scraped their knee. They didn't cry. Just sat there stunned, holding their breath like if they let it go, the pain would rush in. Arrow stopped. I didn't give him a command. He stepped off the path, walked to the fence, and sat. The child looked over. Arrow didn't move, didn't wag, just watched. The child stood, brushed off their pants, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then they waved. Arrow turned back toward me. We walked on. One afternoon, I cleaned out the hallway closet. Old coats, extra blankets, a cracked umbrella, and a box labeled "Don't open unless you mean it." Inside was a vest, green, slightly faded, with a patch on the back that read "Visiting Animal Permitted." It had belonged to my sister's retriever, Emmy. She used to take her to the hospital every Thursday until Emmy passed. I held the vest in both hands, unsure what had drawn me to open the box in the first place. I looked at Arrow, he looked at the vest, and for the first time he stood and walked over without being cold. I held it out, he sniffed it, sat down, didn't look away. I made a few calls. The rec center had a quiet corner where senior citizens gathered once a week to listen to piano music and drink too-sweet coffee. I explained that Arrow was gentle, that he wouldn't wag or jump or smile for treats, but that maybe, just maybe, he'd help someone feel less invisible for a few minutes. They agreed to let us visit. We arrived early. Arrow didn't pull at the leash or pace in the hallway. He walked with intention, like he had a purpose, and I was just lucky to be tagging along. Inside, chairs lined the walls. An old man sat by the window, tapping his fingers on his knee in no particular rhythm. Arrow walked straight to him, sat, said nothing. The man didn't look up for a full minute. When he did, he said, "You're not mine." Arrow blinked. "But you know what it feels like, don't you?" They sat like that for the rest of the hour. No conversation, no petting, just presence. On the way out, the director pulled me aside. "He's unusual," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "He teaches stillness." She smiled. "We could all use more of that." The thing about silence is, you start to notice what breaks it. Arrow didn't bark. I was convinced, after a month, that he physically couldn't. I'd never heard him growl or whine or even sigh the way dogs sometimes do when they settle in. But one evening, he made a sound. It wasn't a bark, not really, more like a sharp breath pushed through a closed mouth. We were on the porch, the sky dimming into that blue-gray color right before dusk becomes night. A neighbor kid was running past on the sidewalk, dragging a stick along the fence like he was playing a one-note song. Arrow sat up, ears angled, and made that sound, a short burst. The kid stopped, looked over, waved. Arrow didn't move, but his tail tapped the wood once, then stopped. It caught me off guard, like watching a statue exhale. The next morning I found him standing in front of the fridge. He wasn't begging, he never begged, he was just standing there, looking up at the magnets. Most were useless coupons and forgotten phone numbers, but one was a photo. A printed snapshot, curled at the edges, of a golden dog with a red collar. Her name was Lacey. She was the reason I hadn't stepped into a shelter in years. She'd been with me through my worst and my nearly better. And when her legs gave out and her eyes faded, I had promised myself I wouldn't do it again. Not the pain, not the aftermath, not the quiet. Arrow stared at that photo for a long time. Then he walked away. I sat down at the table and cried into my coffee like it owed me an apology. At the school across town, a new program had started. Reading buddies, they called it. Kids with speech challenges or social anxiety would read aloud to trained dogs. No judgment, no corrections, just soft ears and quiet patience. The program coordinator had heard about Arrow from the rec center. She called me, said she didn't expect him to jump through hoops. "We just need a dog who doesn't interrupt." I laughed. "That's all he's ever been." The first session was on a Thursday morning. The library room had bean bags and floor cushions shaped like animals. Arrow didn't sit in the middle. He picked the corner, tucked himself against the bookcase, and stayed there. A boy named Simon was the first to approach, 8 years old, big glasses, stutter so soft it sounded like a whisper dragging its feet. He held a book in both hands, spine bent from nervous fingers. "Can I read here?" He asked more to Arrow than me. I nodded. "He's listening." Simon opened the book, cleared his throat, started to read. Arrow didn't blink, didn't shift, just stared at the wall behind Simon's shoulder like he was holding the space open for the words to land safely. By page 3, Simon's stutter had softened. By page 7, it was gone. He finished the last sentence and looked up. "I think he liked it," he said. Arrow looked at him. Simon smiled. That was the first time he stayed after school to talk to anyone. Later that day, I bought Arrow a soft toy from the pet shop. It was shaped like a star, yellow with stitched eyes and a goofy grin. I placed it on the floor near his blanket. He ignored it for 3 days. Then one evening, I came home from the store and found him lying with the toy between his paws. He wasn't chewing it, just resting his chin on it, eyes closed. It looked like comfort, like the past hadn't vanished, it had just found a quieter shape. At the Veterans Center, word had spread. Men and women who hadn't spoken in weeks now asked when the silent dog was coming back. One of them, a man named Jansen, sat in a folding chair by the window every time we visited. He never reached out, never said much. But one day, he patted the chair next to him as we entered. Arrow walked over. Sat down. Jansen didn't pet him, he just spoke. "He reminds me of the one I left behind. We were ambushed. I never saw him again, never heard if he made it out." His hands were shaking. Arrow leaned gently against his leg. They stayed that way for the rest of the session. When we left, Jansen whispered, "Thank you. I'm not sure if it was for Arrow or me. Didn't matter." One night, I dreamed of the brass tag, the one I'd found hanging from Arrow's shelter crate. I'd tucked it into a drawer and forgotten about it. In the dream, the tag was glowing, spinning slowly above a map. A voice, my own maybe, kept saying he was never just a dog, he was someone's answer. I woke up at 4:17 a.m. Arrow was lying beside the bed, eyes open, watching. The next morning, I dug out the tag. There was no address, no number. But under a strong lamp, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a faint line of engraving on the rim, almost too small to read. 4 numbers, a date, no year, no month, just the day. I opened my calendar app. October 27th was 2 weeks away. Maybe it meant nothing, but I circled the date anyway. At the senior center that week, an artist named Millie showed us her latest watercolor. It was Arrow, stretched out under a bay window, tail tucked, eyes nearly closed. "He looked like a secret," she said. I didn't know what to say to that, but I wrote it down in a notebook that night. Because she was right. By the time mid-October rolled around, Arrow had become part of the neighborhood. Kids waved from bicycles. The barista at the coffee shop kept a milk bone in her apron. Even the man who ran the newsstand nodded whenever we passed, but Arrow never got used to crowds. He preferred thresholds, front porches, open doors, the space between leaving and staying. Maybe that's what he was, a pause between past and present, a place to rest before you remembered how to move forward. The air changed near the end of October. The kind of shift that's hard to name, but you feel it, in the light, in the way leaves stop clinging to branches like they've finally accepted the fall, in the silence that comes with colder mornings. Arrow loved it. He'd take longer pauses at doorways, sit just outside the sliding glass like he preferred watching the season from a step away. He'd tilt his head toward the wind, as if it carried something only he could understand. I bought a thicker blanket for his spot by the heater. He didn't protest. But I noticed, quietly, that he still lay on the hardwood sometimes, like some part of him didn't want to get used to comfort. The date on the tag stayed with me. October 27th. I wasn't superstitious, but I was curious. And I've learned that curiosity, in the absence of fear, is just a soft kind of hope. So I called the shelter. "Do you keep intake logs?" The woman on the other end sounded cautious. "We do, depends on the dog." "Why?" There was a brass tag on his crate. Just had the words, he was never just a dog, and a number, 1027. She was silent for a beat. That's not one of ours, but I can check his file. What's the dog's ID number? I gave it to her. There was some clicking on her end, a pause. There's a handwritten note in the intake form, barely legible. Looks like it says found near Ashridge Crossing. Where's that? An hour west. Little town, railroad runs through it, not much else. I didn't plan the trip. But the next morning, I packed a bag with some water, Arrow's blanket, and the yellow star toy he still refused to chew. He watched me load the car like he'd already decided this wasn't a trip he was going to enjoy, but one he had to make. We hit the road before sunrise. Ashridge Crossing wasn't marked on most maps. It showed up as a faded dot just off the county highway, halfway between two towns with no reason to stop in either. There was a diner with no hours posted, a gas station that looked abandoned but still had lights on inside, and a few modest homes built with more function than flair. We parked across from a building that used to be a train depot. Now it was a feed store, judging by the sign that read hay and grain if it eats, we serve it. Arrow stepped out of the car with a kind of stillness I hadn't seen since the day I met him, not frozen, not nervous, just listening. Like something was buried under the dirt and tracks, and he was trying to hear it breathing. We walked the perimeter of the building, then down an old footpath that ran along the edge of the train yard. There wasn't much to see, rusted rails, piles of broken pallets. A chain-link fence leaning into itself like it had grown tired of standing straight. Then, about 100 feet down the path, Arrow stopped. He turned toward a clearing I hadn't noticed before, overgrown with weeds, an old tire half buried in the brush. He walked toward it. I followed. There, leaning against the base of a tree, was a wooden post, about waist-high, weathered, splintered at the edges. Nailed to the top was a brass ring, empty now, no tag, just a faint outline of where one used to hang. I knelt. The wood smelled like sap and thyme. Arrow stood still. Then slowly he sat down next to me, not facing the tree, facing away from it, guarding something I couldn't see. We stayed like that for almost an hour. I didn't speak. Neither did he, but something shifted, not in the world, in me, some realization I couldn't name, that he wasn't just found. He had been left. We drove home in silence. The wind outside carried a kind of softness I hadn't noticed on the way out. Arrow slept in the backseat the whole way, one paw curled around the yellow star. At the Veterans Center that week, something was different. Arrow didn't move toward the usual chair by the window. Instead, he walked into the middle of the room and lay down near a man I hadn't met before. The man was younger than most who visited. Late 30s maybe, eyes rimmed red, hands clasped too tight in his lap. He didn't acknowledge Arrow. But his breathing slowed. At the end of the session, he stood up and said he made it easier. Made what easier? I asked, sitting still. Then he left. Arrow watched him go, then closed his eyes again. At the reading session the following Thursday, Simon was waiting. He brought a new book. One with more words, harder ones. Arrow sat in his usual spot. Simon took a beanbag closer to him this time. He read slower than before, tripped over syllables, but Arrow didn't flinch. By the third page, Simon was reading louder. A librarian whispered, "He's only like that with your dog." I whispered back, "He's not mine." She didn't understand what I meant, but Arrow did. I started keeping a journal, not for myself exactly, for the people Arrow touched, the moments I couldn't afford to forget. The entries weren't long. Veteran said he didn't shake during the session for the first time in months. Kid cried during the story. Arrow didn't move. That helped more than words ever could. Man at the center asked if Arrow could come to his wife's hospice room, not to cheer her up, just to be there. Every page felt like a footprint from someone else's path, and Arrow was walking beside all of them. October 27th came. I didn't expect anything, but I still woke early. Arrow was sitting by the door, not scratching, not pacing, just there, waiting. I made coffee. He didn't move. At 9:30 there was a knock. A man stood on the porch, hat in hand, gray in his beard, not tall, not short, just heavy with memory. "Sorry to bother," he said. "I saw the photo in the paper, your dog, the one from Ashridge." He reached into his coat, pulled out a picture. Arrow, years younger. eyes brighter, standing next to a girl holding a ribbon. My daughter S, he said. His name used to be Scout. Arrow stepped forward. No bark, no wag, just a lean gentle into the man's leg. The man knelt, wrapped his arms around Arrow and pressed his face into that faded coat. I thought I'd never see you again, he whispered. I'm so sorry, I didn't know what to say. He looked up at me, eyes wet. She passed 3 years ago, car accident. He ran off the night after. We searched, posted flyers, called shelters, nothing. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I found him just under a month ago. No tag, just a crate, and a message. The man nodded slowly. That was hers. She had that made after he helped her through chemo when she was a kid. Said he wasn't just a dog. He was the one thing that stayed. He stood slowly. I don't want to take him from you. That's not why I came. I just needed to know he was okay. Arrow looked at me. I looked at him and nodded. He stayed with us a while that day. We sat on the porch, talked about his daughter, her drawings, her quiet laugh. Arrow lay between us like a thread connecting stories too big for words. When the man left, he knelt beside Arrow again. Thank you for not giving up on people. Arrow pressed his head into the man's chest, then let him go. That night, the sky cleared. I took a blanket outside and sat on the steps. Arrow came after a moment, the yellow star in his mouth. He placed it next to my feet, then sat down beside me. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. Neither of us said a thing, but we knew something had ended and something else had started. The man never came back. He left with a soft thank you and a promise he probably couldn't keep, that he'd write, maybe send a copy of the ribbon photo. But some promises aren't made to be kept. They're made to be said, so the silence doesn't eat the goodbye. Arrow didn't seem to mind. If anything, he was gentler after that. Softer in his steps, quieter in his stillness. It was like something had settled inside him, some coil finally unspooled, but even peace leaves a shadow. At the rec center, people had started arriving early just to see him, not for a visit, just for a moment, a nod from across the room. A brief pause to run fingers through his fur, a quiet sentence whispered into the space near his ear. He had become something unspoken in the community, not a pet, not a mascot, a presence, a fixed point people could orbit, even if only for a second. I started keeping notes in the journal more frequently. Woman said she hadn't smiled in a week, but Arrow leaned into her palm and she said it felt like forgiveness. Volunteer asked if dogs can carry grief the way people do. I didn't answer, I just pointed at Arrow. At the library, Simon had become the unofficial reading leader. He showed the younger kids where to sit, helped them choose books, explained that Arrow doesn't like too many jokes in a row, so maybe pick one with feelings. I tried not to laugh, but Simon was serious. He understands books that hurt, he said, because he doesn't look away. In early November, a girl named Isla joined the group. She was 6, pale, thin wrists, shy in the way that feels medical, not just social. She didn't speak the first 2 sessions, just sat on the far cushion, watching the others. Then one day she moved. Arrow was lying near the shelf, head tucked into his paws. Isla crossed the room slowly, sat down, didn't say a word, just placed her open book beside his front leg and began to trace the words with her finger, not out loud, just silently reading with him. Arrow didn't move. Not even when she rested her hand on his back and leaned into his warmth like she was trying to disappear inside it. I didn't tell anyone what happened that day. Some moments belong only to the ones inside them. We started getting letters, not to me, to Arrow. Scrawled in crayon, typed on yellow paper, printed with shaky cursive. Dear Arrow, thank you for making it easier to breathe when the world feels too big. Dear Arrow, you probably don't remember me, but I was the one crying in the green chair. You stayed until I stopped. Dear Arrow, if you could come to my mom's house, I think her heart would stop hurting so much. I taped the letters to the inside of the hallway closet. I didn't know what else to do with love that had no return address. Then came the article. A local columnist had heard about Arrow through the Veterans Center. She called one morning, asked if she could meet him. Not interview me, just meet him. He won't perform, I warned her. He's not that kind of dog. I'm not that kind of writer, she said. She came by in the afternoon. Sat on the floor with a notebook and didn't say a word for the first 15 minutes. Arrow sat beside her, eventually rested his chin on her knee. When she left, she said, "I thought I was coming to write about a dog, but this feels more like a lighthouse." The article ran 2 days later. The dog who reminds us we're still here. No names, no address, just a story about grief and breath, and how sometimes healing doesn't come with music or speeches. Sometimes it comes with stillness. The story was shared over 100 times in a single day. I got emails from neighboring towns asking if Arrow makes visits. A church group sent a hand-drawn banner that said, "Thank you for listening, Arrow." The banner was longer than my hallway. I rolled it up and placed it in a cardboard tube labeled "Later." Because I wasn't ready to think about endings yet, it was a Thursday when I noticed the limp. We were walking near the elementary school. Arrow stopped to sniff the base of a lamppost, then took a step and winced. Just slightly, barely noticeable unless you knew his usual rhythm, but I did. He didn't make a sound, just adjusted the way he moved, like he was trying not to be found out. At home, I examined his paw, no cuts, no swelling, but he winced again when I touched the joint behind the shoulder. I called the vet. They had an appointment the next day. Arrow didn't resist the carrier, didn't hesitate on the scale. He just sat on the cold tile floor, waiting for the news he probably already knew. The vet was kind. He ran a few scans, took blood, felt along Arrow's ribs and limbs and spine. Then he looked at me with a gentle weight in his expression. "How old is he?" "I don't know," he nodded. "Well, he's older than he looks. Arthritis in the rear joints, some nerve sensitivity, could be manageable, but what?" He hesitated. "Some dogs carry stress the way people carry trauma. Quietly, invisibly, until the body decides it's had enough." I looked down at Arrow, who was staring out the window like the trees held answers I didn't. "He's still mobile," the vet added. "But eventually, you'll want to think about quality of life." I nodded. Didn't speak until we were in the car again. I looked at Arrow through the rearview mirror. "Tell me when it's time, okay?" He blinked once, then closed his eyes. That night, I laid out the old fleece blanket on the couch. Arrow climbed up slowly, curled beside me. I turned on the television. Muted the volume. We sat in the flicker of old movie light, listening to the sounds of the building settling around us. And I knew, whether he had months or weeks or just this one night, he had already given more than most people ever do. Arrow didn't slow down immediately. There were good days. Sometimes great ones. He'd rise from the rug by the heater, stretch until his front paws slid forward like drawn curtains, then trot to the door with the slightest lift of energy. He'd walk a little longer, sniff more corners, give the birds at the park just enough attention to let them know he still noticed. But the bad days came too. Slow steps, longer naps, a stiffness in the morning that no amount of sunshine seemed to melt. He never whimpered, he never complained. But you could see it. He was giving what he had left piece by piece. I started marking it in the journal, not the pain, not the limp. The giving, stayed by a crying man for 45 minutes without moving, not even once. Let a toddler crawl on him like a jungle gym, patient, still. Soft eyes the whole time. Made a boy laugh who hadn't smiled in months, according to his sister. Every entry felt like a final stanza in a poem you didn't realize had been writing itself the whole time. One afternoon, Simon brought a drawing to the library session. It was simple, marker on folded printer paper, Arrow sitting beside a stack of books. Simon, with a speech bubble that read, "You don't have to talk to be heard." I asked if I could keep it. He grinned and said, "It's for him." Arrow didn't react, but when we got home, he sniffed the paper gently before I taped it to the fridge. It stayed there for the rest of the season. A retired carpenter named Joe started stopping by our porch. He never knocked. He'd just pass by during his afternoon walk, tip his hat, and leave a wooden token behind. A carved feather, a polished coin. One day, a small wooden bone engraved with a single word, "Keeper." He never explained, I never asked. Arrow sat beside the front door every afternoon like he was expecting Joe, even on the days he didn't come, especially on those days. The director at the senior center began organizing quiet visits. No agenda, no crafts, just people, a chair, Arrow. A silence big enough to hold whatever they couldn't say aloud. Some folks came and cried without reason. Others smiled and said nothing. One woman sat across from Arrow for 20 minutes, then whispered, "He reminded me I'm still here." I added that to the journal, didn't need her name. Some truths wear every face. Near the holidays, the librarian asked if we'd be part of a community event. Stories by the fire, dogs in festive scarves, cocoa with extra marshmallows. I hesitated. Era wasn't fond of crowds. But something about the way she asked, gentle, with space for no, I knew she understood. I said yes. We arrived early. Arrow lay near the hearth while children read aloud from winter books, their voices rising and falling like wind through pine needles. No one touched him unless he moved closer first. But most didn't need to. Just being in the room with him made everything feel warmer, like a heartbeat under wool. Afterward, a mother approached me. She held her son's hand. He looked maybe 4, wide eyes, mismatched gloves. She knelt beside Arrow and said, "He's been afraid of dogs since last year. Bitten at a family gathering, hasn't gone near one since." The boy reached out slowly. Arrow didn't move. The boy touched his fur, quick, hesitant. Then again, slower, he giggled. "His fur feels like clouds," he said. The mother's eyes filled. Arrow blinked once. A silent nod. Another gift handed over without request. That night I took him up the old trail behind the apartment. It overlooked the city, a ledge of rock and wind, and amber streetlights curling into the dark. We sat side by side. The stars were faint, but there, "I don't know what comes next," I said aloud, "but I know you changed everything." Arrow pressed his body gently into my side. The warmth was familiar, like a coat you almost forgot you owned until it's cold again. Back home, I found the crate tag. Still tucked inside the closet, beside Simon's drawing and the stack of letters. I turned it over in my hands. He was never just a dog. It felt different now, less like a declaration, more like an echo, a reminder that some truths aren't spoken, they're carried, and Arrow carried more than most. That weekend, I took him to the lake. It was cold, wind slicing the surface, trees bare like open hands. He stood at the edge of the dock and looked out across the water, didn't bark, didn't move, just stared. I stood beside him. After a while, he leaned his head gently against my thigh. I rested my hand on his shoulder. We didn't speak. Didn't have to. Some goodbyes begin long before they're said. The snow came early that year, not heavy, just soft flurries dusting the sidewalks and gathering in corners of porch steps. The kind that disappears when it touches warm skin but lingers on rooftops and memory. Arrow sat by the window most mornings now. The yellow star lay beside him, worn at the edges, still untouched. He'd glance at it sometimes, nudge it slightly with his nose. I never moved it. It wasn't a toy. It was an offering, a silent kind of comfort that didn't ask for anything in return. He walked slower now. Every few steps, he'd pause like the earth had shifted under his paws and he was giving it time to settle. People noticed. At the center, at the park, even at the corner shop, everyone asked gently, "How's he doing? Does he need anything? Is he okay?" I always gave the same answer. He's still giving, because he was. Still pressing his head into tired hands. Still sitting beside those who couldn't speak. Still walking forward, even when it clearly took more than it used to. One evening, I found him standing in front of the mirror. He wasn't looking at himself, just standing there, his head tilted, staring at the reflection like it might tell him something he'd forgotten. Or maybe remind him of who he used to be. I crouched beside him, waited. He didn't move, didn't blink. Eventually, I reached over and touched his paw. He stepped away from the mirror and leaned against me, slow and sure, like he remembered where he was now, and that it was enough. Simon brought another drawing. This time, Arrow was lying under a big tree with words falling from its branches like leaves. Each word had a name inside it. People from the library, the rec center, the park. Because he remembers all of us, Simon said. I added it to the closet door beside the others. The wall was nearly full now, a forest of thanks, rooted in silence. December crept in like a sigh. The holidays brought lights and laughter, but the weight of endings too. People began asking more often if Era would visit. They didn't say it, but I heard it anyway, just in case. And so we went. To the center, to the library, even to the coffee shop where the barista had sewn a tiny scarf just for him, a red one with his name stitched in thread, Arrow listener, healer, friend. He wore it like it had always belonged to him. We were on the trail again when it happened. The ridge overlooking the city. He took 2 steps, then stopped. His back leg gave slightly. He didn't fall. He didn't whimper. He just sat, right there on the cold dirt and pine needles. I sat beside him, waited. His breathing was slow, his gaze steady. The skyline blinked in the distance like tired eyes. After a long time, he nudged his head against my shoulder. I didn't move, didn't speak, just sat with him while the wind brushed past us like a memory heading elsewhere. That night, he didn't eat much, didn't move much, but he stayed close. Closer than ever. Every time I shifted, he followed, not because he was anxious, because he was present. He knew something was changing, maybe not ending, but shifting, becoming something else. I called the vet the next morning, asked if they could come to the house. Not because I thought it was time, not yet, but I wanted the option. Some doors are best opened before you need them. They understood. In the afternoon, the mail arrived. A package, no return address. Inside, a book, handmade, bound with twine, each page a note, written in different hands. He stayed until I was ready. He listened like my voice mattered. He reminded me the world can be soft. He was never mine, but he held my grief anyway. He gave my child the courage to speak. He gave me the courage not to. At the back of the book was one photo. Arrow sitting under the tree near the library, eyes closed, yellow star in front of him. The caption read, "Some angels don't arrive, they return." I closed the book and placed it beside the journal. Didn't need to write anything that day. The words had already found their way home. That evening, Arrow stood at the front door, not waiting to go out, just standing. I opened the door. He stepped outside. Snow was falling. He walked to the center of the yard, sat down, lifted his head to the sky, let it fall around him, white against faded fur, still as ever. Like he was remembering every place he'd been, every hand he'd touched, every silence he had softened. I didn't call him back inside. I just stood there and watched, because some moments are meant to be kept exactly as they are. Arrow began sleeping closer to the door, not like he was guarding it. Like he was listening for something on the other side. He'd rest his head against the frame, body curled into a shape so quiet you could miss it in the half-light. But his ears twitched when a car passed, when a child laughed down the block, when the building settled in its bones. I wondered if he was waiting for someone, or if he just wanted to be the last one to leave. At the rec center, the piano player didn't show. Weather was bad, roads too slick. The director asked if I'd mind reading aloud instead. I said yes, then realized I didn't know what to bring. I turned to Arrow, who was already curled beside the bag we kept near the door. So I packed the letters, the book of stories, Simon's drawing, and the brass tag. The room was warm when we arrived, more crowded than usual. Word had spread. No one said it, but we all knew Arrow might not have many visits left. I placed the book on the small podium. Arrow lay down in his usual spot, center of the room, near the vent. I opened to the first letter. "Dear Arrow, thank you for being the one thing that didn't need fixing." There were tears. Soft laughter, the kind of silence that settles in only after it's been earned. When the reading was done, a woman approached with her granddaughter. She knelt beside Arrow, resting her palm gently on his shoulder. "My husband used to sit with him," she whispered, "before he passed." She looked up at me. Arrow stayed longer than anyone else. Her granddaughter reached out with both hands and hugged him, arms barely stretching around his chest. Arrow didn't move, but I swear, just for a moment, he leaned in. The next morning, I couldn't find him. Panic rose fast, too fast. Then I heard the sound, gentle padding of paws on wood. He was on the porch, lying in the sun. Next to him, the yellow star. He had carried it out himself. It was the first time he'd ever done that. I sat beside him on the step. "I know," I whispered. "It's soon." He rested his head against my leg. Didn't move for a long time. That afternoon, the vet returned my call. "Whenever you're ready," he said gently. I thanked him, hung up. Didn't tell Arrow, didn't have to, he already knew. We spent the next few days visiting every place that had held his shadow. The trail, the library. The porch swing behind the center, where a teenager once told him secrets she couldn't tell her parents. Each place welcomed him like it always had. Each goodbye was silent, but full. People pressed their hands to his fur, kissed the top of his head, held his gaze longer than usual. He never turned away, never looked tired, only whole, like he was giving each piece of himself back one moment at a time. On our last night, we sat in the living room, snow against the windows, the journal open on the floor beside me, the yellow star tucked between Arrow's paws. I whispered stories to him, my own, the ones others had given him. The time Simon read 3 chapters without a single stumble. The time the old man played harmonica for 15 minutes and Arrow didn't flinch once. The time we walked into a hospital room and the nurse said she hasn't opened her eyes in 2 days and did the second Arrow touched her bed. He blinked slowly, listened, still giving, even now. Morning came quietly, no sunrise, just gray light filtering through frost. Arrow stood once, stretched. Then walked to the front door and sat. He looked back at me. That was the moment, no drama, no collapse, just a look, a knowing. I opened the door. The vet was waiting. So was the soft blanket, the space we'd prepared. Arrow lay down without being asked. I held him. Told him he was the best thing I never meant to find, the best silence I'd ever heard. The vet was gentle, kind. The end was soft, no struggle, no fear, just peace. After I sat on the porch for a long time, snow falling in slow spirals, the yard still. Inside, the yellow star lay beside his empty blanket. And the silence, it wasn't the same, it wasn't empty, it was full of everything he left behind. The house was too quiet after, not the kind of quiet that settles when you're reading or resting, the other kind. The kind that echoes with what used to be there. His blanket stayed folded for a week. The yellow star remained untouched on the floor. I moved it once, put it on the windowsill where the light hit mid-morning. It didn't feel right, so I put it back. That spot on the floor had been his, still was. Letters came in again, more than I expected, from people I'd never met. A nurse from the hospice wing wrote, he brought warmth when even the blankets couldn't. A child sent a postcard with glitter and crooked letters, Dear Arrow, I wish you were a ghost so I could still pet you. A man from across town, someone who'd only seen Arrow in passing, sent a photo of his porch. Arrow had once stopped there during a walk, just sat beside the man for 5 minutes. I didn't even say anything, the note read, but I felt better after. I never forgot that. The rec center held a moment of silence, just 1 minute, but it stretched longer. No one wanted to be the first to breathe too loud. There was no speech, no slideshow, just a small sign on the wall, in memory of the friend who never needed to speak to be heard. Underneath, they pinned a photo. Arrow, eyes half closed, lying near the piano bench. I stood there for a long time, didn't cry, didn't move, just let the silence fill everything the way he used to. Simon stopped coming to the library for 2 weeks. I didn't blame him. When he finally returned, he was quiet, sat in the old spot. Read without looking up, but at the end, he placed a folded note beside the cushion Arrow used to lay on. I waited until everyone had gone, opened it. Inside, a simple sentence written in a child's unsteady hand. I'm still brave. He made sure of that. The trail felt longer without him, colder. But I walked it anyway. One morning I found something left behind on the ridge. A small wooden plaque nailed into a tree. No name, no dates, just a carved message, still here. Someone had remembered. Someone had honored him in their own way. And they knew he wasn't gone. He had simply returned to the places he'd been whole. I went through the journal again, not to add anything, just to read, to sit with the moments. I realized something. Arrow never tried to fix people. He didn't distract them, didn't wag through pain or nudge away sorrow. He sat in it with them. Held it, carried part of it, so they wouldn't have to do it alone. That was the gift, the miracle in the mundane, the stillness that made the world softer. I printed a photo, the one Simon had drawn, the tree with the falling words. I framed it and hung it by the front door. Above it I placed Arrow's tag, not hidden in a drawer, not folded into grief, visible, readable, permanent. He was never just a dog. He was a space that let people rest, a quiet heartbeat that never asked for more than presence. It snowed again the next week. Heavier, the world turned white. A child knocked on my door holding a toy. It was a plush dog, gray fur, kind eyes. I know he's not Arrow, she said, but maybe he can sit where Arrow used to. I nodded. She set the toy beside the heater and smiled. He'll listen too, I can tell. She left without asking for anything. The plush stayed right where she placed it. Not a replacement, just a reminder of love passed forward. The plush dog stayed by the heater through the rest of winter. No one moved it. Neighbors dropped by and nodded at it the same way they used to nod at Arrow. Some kids brought it tiny gifts, drawings, a knitted scarf, a biscuit wrapped in foil. It wasn't about the toy, it was about what it meant, about the space it held open. I found myself speaking to it sometimes, not because I expected answers. Just because the rhythm of saying things aloud had become part of me. Arrow had listened so long, so deeply, it was hard to stop offering words into the quiet. The library hosted a small exhibit in February, Voices That Were Heard. It featured stories from kids in the reading program. Each entry started the same way. When I read to Arrow, Simon's was placed in the center. It read, "When I read to Arrow, I didn't feel broken. I felt heard." And after a while, the words didn't get stuck anymore. Beside it, they displayed his original drawing. The one with the tree and the falling names. I stood in front of it for a long time. A man next to me asked, "Was Arrow really that quiet?" I smiled, quieter than silence. The Veterans Center started a new program. They called it Stillness Sessions. It wasn't therapy, no counselors, no drills. Just a room, some chairs, one candle, and time. Wouldn't have thought of it, the director said. But Arrow, he taught people how to be okay in the quiet. They kept his photo on a shelf near the door. Below it, a plaque read, "For the one who stayed, even when no one asked him to." I received a package in the mail from the father, the man who had come to the porch months ago looking for the dog his daughter once loved. Inside was a letter. "I've been volunteering with a grief group now. At first, I didn't think I could do it. But I kept thinking of how Arrow just sat with people, didn't fix anything, just showed up. I can do that too. I can sit. I can stay." Enclosed was a photograph, a circle of chairs in a sunlit room. In the center, a single empty cushion. The caption on the back, "For the guest who's always welcome." That was the thing about Arrow. He didn't heal wounds. He held space for them. And somehow that was enough. One of the teachers from the school reached out. She asked if she could tell Arrow's story in her class. I think some of the kids need to believe that presence matters. That kindness can be quiet. I sent her a copy of the journal, redacted names, just the moments. A week later, I received 27 handwritten notes. Each one said thank you. Each one shared something that Arrow had unknowingly helped them release. One said, "My dad died last year. I didn't know how to talk about it. But when you wrote that Arrow sat with people who hurt, I think I understand now. He didn't try to make them happy. He just stayed until they were ready." The plush toy eventually wore thin. A tear opened along the seam of one leg. I meant to sew it. But Simon beat me to it. He showed up with a tiny needle kit, borrowed from his grandmother. "I learned to stitch," he said. "Arrow would have wanted me to fix what I could." We sat together on the porch while he worked, his hands careful, focused. When he finished, he pressed the plush gently back into its place. "I think he'd like that," he whispered. I did too. Spring arrived quietly, no fanfare, just color returning to the trees and the sound of life moving again. Arrow's absence no longer stung like it used to, but it never left. It had changed shape, became part of the way the house felt, the rhythm of walks I still took alone, the journal I still opened some nights to read old entries like scripture. I started something new, small cards. Each one printed with a message inspired by things people had written about Arrow. Stillness is its own kind of strength. You were heard. Not everything broken needs to be fixed. I left them in quiet places, library shelves, bus stop benches, beneath coffee shop saucers. People started sharing them online. No signature, just words. Arrow's words really passed forward, softly. The cards kept showing up. People started leaving their own versions, notes scribbled on napkins, quotes from books, song lyrics, even single words like stay or seen. No one signed them. But they all knew who started it. Arrow had become the quiet thread tying strangers together. He wasn't a trend. He wasn't a hashtag. He was a whisper passed from one heart to the next. At the rec center, they turned the empty room into a permanent space, a single chair in the middle. No decorations, no signs, just a small plaque on the door, "Quiet room, stay as long as you need." People used it more than anyone expected. Some went in for 5 minutes, others for an hour. One woman brought a book and stayed all afternoon. The director smiled when she told me. He's still doing his work, just in a different way. One afternoon, I went through the hallway closet, pulled everything out, blankets, coats, the old scarf. At the back was the cardboard tube I'd labeled later. Inside, the hand-drawn banner from the church group. "Thank you for listening, Arrow." I unrolled it, hung it above the window. It didn't feel like mourning anymore. It felt like honoring. Simon invited me to his school. His class was putting on a project fair. His was titled, "How Silence Can Help." He built a cardboard model of the library. Placed a small figure on the floor next to a stack of books. "This is Arrow," he said. "He taught me how to read without being scared." His teacher nodded toward me. "You're the one who took him all those places." "I just followed him," I said. "He always knew where to go." People began asking if I was going to adopt another dog. At first, I shook my head. Arrow hadn't just filled a space. He had become part of its foundation. How do you replace a presence? But time softens questions like that. I visited the shelter, not to adopt, just to sit. One of the workers recognized me. "You're Arrow's person." I almost corrected her. But then I didn't, because maybe that's what I had become. There was a new dog in the last pen, black and tan, young, nervous, didn't bark, just watched. I crouched, let him sniff my hand. He didn't flinch. But he didn't move closer either. I understood. Sometimes trust takes time. I didn't take him home, not that day, but I returned the next, and the next, just sat by the gate, let him watch me. Eventually he sat too, didn't press forward, just mirrored me, the way Arrow used to. I brought one of the message cards, slipped it into the edge of his gate. It read, "You're allowed to take your time." He sniffed it, sat back down. We waited together. At the library, they made a section just for Arrow's story. Kids could read the letters, see the drawings, even hold the yellow star toy, a replica. Simon had insisted we keep the original safe. They called the shelf "Stories That Stay." New entries appeared every week. One boy wrote, "I want to be like Arrow, not famous, just helpful." Another said, "I didn't think quiet could feel so big." But Arrow's quiet was like the sky. Sometimes I still talk to him, when I pass the heater, when I tie my shoes by the door, when I stop at the top of the trail to catch my breath. I don't expect him to answer. He never really did. But I feel him in the pauses between words, in the choice to listen before I speak, in the patience I didn't used to have. One evening, I lit a candle, placed it beside his tag. The house was dark, but it didn't feel empty, just still. The way it used to when he sat by the window and watched the world without trying to change it. Somewhere deep in that silence, I whispered, "Thank you for showing me how to stay." I returned to the shelter again, 3rd week in a row. Same dog, same gate, same distance between us. But this time something shifted. When I knelt down, he didn't stay back. He stepped forward, placed his paw gently against the mesh. Not a request, a question. "Are you still the kind of person who listens?" I adopted him that day, didn't name him immediately. Didn't try to fill him with expectations he hadn't earned. I let him move through the house like water through old pipes, tentative, searching, adapting. He didn't lie in Arrow's favorite spots. He found his own, the corner near the hallway, the cushion I hadn't used since autumn. He sniffed the yellow star but left it untouched. That felt right. That had always belonged to someone else. People noticed the new presence. The library kids asked what his name was. I told them he's still figuring it out. Simon was the first to offer a suggestion. "Maybe don't name him right away. Maybe let him tell you." He smiled and added, "That's what Arrow did." The new dog didn't have Arrow's stillness. He was restless in his bones, light on his feet, curious in a way that made shadows nervous. But he was gentle, especially with the quiet kids. He didn't mind being stared at, or hugged too tightly, or sat beside without warning. He had patience, a different kind. The kind that said, I won't stay still, but I'll stay close. I began writing again, not just in the journal, but in letters, to no one, to Arrow, to the people he'd helped, to the ones still hurting. They weren't meant to be read, just released, left on benches, taped to walls, folded into books. They began to spread, others joined in. I wasn't the only one carrying stories anymore. At the trailhead, someone had installed a wooden post, not official, just handmade, with a carved inscription, for those who walk with ghosts that never scared them. People left stones at its base, feathers, dog tags, notes written on weatherproof paper. The pile grew every week, not cluttered, sacred, a shrine to quiet things that stay. One Sunday, I took the new dog to the rec center. He trotted ahead, tail high, eyes wide. Arrow would have waited, sat by the door and looked up, asking permission with his silence. But this one wanted to arrive, to see, to know. Inside, a boy named Eli reached out and touched his ear. His ears feel like velvet, he said. Then he looked up at me, but different than Arrow. That's okay, right? I nodded. That's more than okay. We started calling him Finch, not for the bird, but for the idea that some creatures sing even when no one's listening. He didn't mind the name. Came when I called, stayed when I needed, woke when I had nightmares, and rested his head on my chest until my breathing slowed. He was nothing like Arrow, and somehow exactly what I needed now. One afternoon, I found him sitting by the bookshelf. He had knocked over a stack of old photos. Among them was the one of Arrow under the tree. Finch nosed it gently, then looked at me, like he understood, not who Arrow was, but what he had meant. I sat beside him. We stayed there for a while, not grieving, just remembering. Finch took to the town in his own way. He wasn't like Arrow, never tried to be. He didn't sit at thresholds or linger in the stillness. He ran, nose down, tail up, taking in the world like it might disappear if he didn't memorize it all now. But he learned to slow down when it mattered, especially around the kids. The first time he visited the library, the room shifted, not with grief, with curiosity. Simon had grown taller. He was nearly 10 now, more confident, more direct. He walked up to Finch, crouched low, and held out a piece of dried fruit. Finch sniffed it, then took it gently. Simon nodded. He's different, I like that. At the Veterans Center, some of the older visitors were hesitant. They remembered Arrow, but Finch didn't press. He'd sit nearby, close enough to be noticed, but never intrusive. Eventually, they warmed to him. One man said, "He reminds me of a wild thing pretending to be calm." I laughed. "He's learning, aren't we all?" the man replied. I took Finch to the trail one evening. The sky was pink at the edges, the kind of color that makes you feel like maybe the world is being kind to you for once. He ran ahead, then stopped suddenly. I caught up and saw what he'd found. A feather, white, clean, balanced on a stone. He nudged it with his nose, then sat beside it, not to rest, to notice, just like Arrow would have. That night I wrote in the journal for the first time in a while. Finch is Arrow's shadow. He's his echo, louder, messier, but from the same voice. At the rec center, a woman asked if Finch was going to carry on the work. I wasn't sure what to say. Arrow hadn't worked. He stayed. There's a difference, but maybe Finch could do both. So I said he'll make his own way. But yes, he's here to help. A new kid joined the reading group. Tyler, 7 years old, didn't speak above a whisper, hid behind his glasses like they were a shield. Finch noticed him right away. He trotted over, dropped a toy at Tyler's feet. A soft squirrel missing one ear. Tyler didn't smile, didn't move, but he picked up the toy, held it in both hands. When he sat down, Finch curled up beside him. By week 3, Tyler was reading aloud, not loudly, but clearly. Finch had a way of being nearby when it mattered. Not in the same solemn, weighty way Arrow had, but in a different rhythm. Lighter, like laughter in the other room, like music from a neighbor's porch. He didn't carry grief, he chased it away. People started telling new stories, not about Arrow, about Finch. He stole my shoe and gave it back covered in leaves. He barks when I sing out of tune. He brings me socks when I cry. They weren't the kind of stories that settled deep into your ribs like Arrow's, but they danced on the surface, joyful, silly, healing in a louder way. One morning I found Finch sitting beside the plush toy, the one the little girl had given after Arrow passed. It had gone untouched for months, but Finch had placed his paw on it, just gently, not possessively, just. Aware, I whispered, he'd have liked you. Finch thumped his tail. Didn't break eye contact, didn't need to. Spring cracked open the world like a slow breath. Grass returned in uncertain patches, trees whispered their green beginnings. Finch ran through it all like the wind had dared him to race it. He loved movement, even stillness had to be earned. Where Arrow once found peace in pauses, Finch found joy in motion, each step a little celebration that he was here and here and here again. The town started calling him by name. At first, it startled me, how fast they'd embraced him, but I realized Finch didn't arrive in Arrow's shadow. He arrived through it, the light behind him different, but just as warm. Kids at the library made a new banner, painted handprints, names scrawled in bright colors. At the center, a picture of Finch drawn by Isla. She was older now, more confident. Arrow stayed with me when I was afraid, she told the group. But Finch reminds me not to stay afraid forever. No one corrected her, because that was the difference. Arrow held the hurt. Finch helped you run past it. We created something called the Listening Walk. Just a simple path near the community garden, lined with wooden signs. Each sign held a short sentence. Breathe here, you're still becoming. Quiet is a kind of courage. Arrow's messages reframed. Finch walked the path every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with people who didn't speak. Always noticing, I started sleeping better, not because the grief was gone, but because I'd made room for joy again. Grief isn't a boulder you carry forever. It's a stone you learn to place beside you. Sometimes you sit with it. Sometimes you walk past it. Sometimes, if you're lucky, a dog comes along and kicks it just far enough away that you forget to pick it back up. Simon had a school project where he had to present someone who changed your life. He chose Arrow. He stood at the front of the class with a photo, the yellow star, and his quiet, steady voice. Arrow didn't talk, but he helped me talk. At the end, he looked at me in the back of the room and said, I hope Finch knows he doesn't have to be the same. Finch became a bridge. He was the dog who remembered the one before him without ever knowing him. He'd pause at Arrow's old spots, not every time, but enough. He'd lie beside the tree where Arrow once watched a girl read. He'd stop on the trail at the ledge with the carved sign, never long, just long enough. As if nodding at the memory, then pulling it forward with him, I received a letter from a woman in another state. She had visited the center once, only once, sat in the quiet room. She wrote, your dog didn't even look at me. He just existed nearby. That was enough. I went home and left a bad situation. I think Arrow gave me the space to hear myself again. She included a photo of her new dog, named Whisper. I looked at Finch that night while he was gnawing on a piece of driftwood he found on the trail. Do you know how much you've helped already? He paused, dropped the wood, and leaned against my knee, tail wagging once. Maybe that was his answer. Maybe it always had been. Summer didn't announce itself this year. It just arrived, not with heat or thunder, but with still evenings, long golden hours, and the smell of earth coming back to life. Finch was bigger now, still lean, still fast, but his muscles had filled out, and he no longer flinched at unfamiliar sounds. He had made this place his own. The town began organizing something called Arrow Day, not a holiday, a gesture. The community decided to mark the day Arrow passed as one of quiet acts. No parades, no speeches, just presence. People left messages on park benches. Kids read aloud to their pets in the square. A food drive was held with no branding, no photos, just a sign that said, give because someone once gave you silence when you needed it most. I brought Finch to the ridge that evening. The sky was layered in soft orange and silver. We stood at the same ledge where Arrow used to sit. Finch didn't lie down. He stood beside me, tail wagging slowly. Then he looked out, not with stillness, but with joy. I whispered, he'd be proud of you. Finch leaned into me. Back in town, the library hosted a story circle, not just kids, adults too. Each person shared a moment when kindness had changed them. Some stories were about Arrow, some were about Finch, some had no dogs at all, but they all echoed the same truth: presence matters, and so does passing it forward. That week, I received a letter from a therapist at a nearby town. She had modeled a trauma group after the quiet room. Low pressure, minimal words, one therapy dog. Her message ended with, "We found that people open up when they aren't expected to." Arrow taught that. Finch reminded us not to be afraid when they do. Finch learned new things. How to guide someone with shaky steps, how to nudge a dropped book back towards small hands, how to sit perfectly still when a boy needed to cry without being noticed. He was still himself, still messy, still loud when excited, but he had learned the value of pause, not silence, just stillness. The kind that says, "I see you." Simon graduated from the reading program. He gave a little speech. "I don't know if dogs go to heaven," he said, "but I think heaven is probably quieter than we think. And maybe that's because the best parts of life happen when no one is talking." Then he looked at me. "Thanks for letting Arrow stay with all of us. And Finch too." That night I opened the closet again. The journal was full, no more pages, no more space. So I placed it gently in the box with the plush, the letters, the tag. Then I opened a new notebook. First page, this story began with stillness. But it keeps going with movement, with joy, with dogs who remember in their own way. The house had changed. Same walls, same windows, same sun that spilled across the floor, but something in its bones felt lighter. Maybe because grief had unpacked its bags and made room for company. Maybe because Finch didn't leave shadows, only trails of barked laughter and half-chewed socks. Maybe because I was different too. I started writing for real again, not just letters or journal entries. Stories about dogs who stayed, kids who whispered into fur, old men who found peace in quiet pause. I didn't name them Arrow or Finch, but they were there in every paragraph. Readers sent messages. This one reminded me of my dad. "I think I met a dog like that once." This felt like permission to miss someone. That was what Arrow had done, offered permission to feel, to wait. To heal on your own time. Finch didn't know about the stories, he just lived them. One morning he brought me a glove he found under the porch. It was moldy, weathered, forgotten. He dropped it on my foot and wagged. "Is this your version of treasure?" I asked. He grinned in the only way dogs do, with his whole body. Maybe that's what joy is, bringing someone else what you found in the dark. We went back to the shelter that week, not for another adoption, just to visit. Finch sniffed every kennel, paused at one, sat. Inside, an older dog. Gray around the muzzle, tail still, eyes bright but wary. The volunteer told me her name was Wren, abandoned after her person passed. Quiet. Gentle, doesn't ask for much, the volunteer said. I crouched by the gate. Wren stood, stepped forward, touched her nose to Finch's through the bars. No sound. No drama, just recognition. We didn't adopt her. Someone else did the next day. But I visited again before she left. Gave the new family a card, not advice, not a warning, just a message. Let her take her time. She'll find you when she's ready. That night I found Finch staring at the plush dog by the heater. He looked over his shoulder at me, then lay down beside it. No noise, no fanfare, just there, as if to say, I remember too. I updated the quiet room, added a second chair. People had started coming in pairs. Friends, siblings. Parent and child, not always to talk, sometimes just to be still together, sometimes that's enough. I added a small sign, "You don't have to be alone to be quiet." Simon stopped by the house one afternoon. He was older now, voice deeper, backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. "I start high school soon," he said. Finch barked once, as if to say, "I approve." Simon laughed. "Do you think dogs remember us forever?" "I think they remember the parts of us that needed them most." We walked to the trail. The sky was overcast, humming with an almost rain. At the carved tree, Simon placed a new stone at the base. "I'm not sad anymore," he said, "but I'm still grateful." We stood there in the hush. Finch sat between us, wagged once, like punctuation at the end of a soft sentence. Autumn returned without ceremony, no blaze of orange. Just the leaves turning in slow, sleepy spirals and the wind coming back to knock once on the windows each morning. Finch loved it. The crackle of leaves under paw, the way his breath turned visible in the chill air, the squirrels to chase and the paths to lose himself in. But more than that, he loved the people it brought outside. He became something of a neighborhood presence. Kids would call his name from porches. Elders would leave biscuits by the community bench. One woman knitted him a tiny hat. He wore it once, crooked and confused. Simon said he looked like a librarian trying to retire. Finch, somehow, seemed pleased with that. Arrow had taught people to sit. Finch taught them to get up again. The community center installed a mural. It stretched the full length of the back hallway. It wasn't just a picture of Arrow. It was a series of silhouettes, Arrow, then Finch, then a trail of animals with no names, each stepping forward, each leaving behind small pieces of light. At the top, it read, "What stays behind becomes what we follow." At the park one morning, Finch ran ahead and disappeared behind the grove of trees. When I caught up, I found him sitting beside a boy in a red hoodie. The boy was crying, head buried in his arms. Finch didn't nudge him, didn't bark. He just sat, still, present. Arrow would have done the same. The boy lifted his head after a while, looked at Finch, then leaned forward and hugged him. No words, just breath. That moment, that stillness, it wasn't borrowed. It was inherited. I realized then that Arrow hadn't left behind a story. He'd left behind a blueprint. We started hosting quiet mornings at the library. Open doors, no events, no noise, just space to be. People came with sketchbooks, with letters, with thermoses of tea and nothing else. Finch would walk through gently, stop beside those who needed him, rest his chin on someone's knee. Move on without a sound. He knew who was reaching even when they didn't. A woman brought her newborn one day. The baby fussed. Finch approached slowly. The baby went quiet. The mother started crying. "I haven't had a quiet moment in days," she said, smiling through the tears. Finch lay at her feet until she finished her tea. Simon started writing his own stories. He sent me one. It was about a boy who couldn't talk, and a dog who never asked him to. At the end, the boy speaks, not because he's cured, but because he wants to share the silence he was given. I framed the last page, hung it above the journal shelf. The first snowfall of the new winter came early. Finch pressed his nose to the glass, watching the flakes collect like memories on the edge of the porch railing. He didn't bark, just observed, like Arrow used to, but not in silence. Finch hummed when he breathed sometimes, soft, curious sounds like questions he hadn't yet decided to ask. I took him to the ridge again. The wind was gentle. The sky dusted in gray. We stood at the same spot where Arrow had sat, where I had whispered thanks into the air and hoped it carried. Finch circled once, then lay down, not because he was tired, because he knew this was one of those places, a place where stories had roots, where grief had bloomed into something more forgiving, where the earth held echoes. I pulled the last card from my coat pocket. The one I had kept for this day. It read, "Thank you for staying until I knew how to go on." I didn't leave it there. I read it aloud, then folded it and tucked it back into my pocket. Some truths don't need to be planted. They just need to be carried. Back home, the library had created a new section. It wasn't about Arrow anymore, or Finch. It was about what came after. It was called "The Quiet We Learned to Trust." It had books about listening, drawings from children who'd never met Arrow, poems written by teens who used to be terrified of their own voices, and in the center, a single cushion, no sign, no plaque, just an open space to sit. Simon's story was added to the collection. He came by to see it. "I'm thinking of volunteering at the shelter next summer," he said. I nodded. "He'd like that," I said. Simon looked at Finch. "He already does." A new family moved into the house next door. They had a small dog, nervous, wiry, unsure. Finch greeted it with a nudge and a wag. The dog froze, then followed him across the yard, just like that. Another quiet beginning. Another possible story. That night I sat by the heater with a new notebook. I wrote, "Arrow showed me how to stay still. Finch reminded me how to move again. Both were right. Both were love." Then I added a new line at the bottom of the bookshelf where all the others lived. It said, "Some silences teach us how to speak again." Finch curled at my feet. The snow fell outside like it was tucking the world in, and somewhere beneath it all, I swear I felt it, that quiet weight of something holy. Arrow's presence, still here, not as a shadow, not even as memory, but as space, a space where everything else could begin again.
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our paw-some friends.